Norwegian immigration, we all think of Garrison Keillor and Lake Wobegon and the solid farmers, bachelor farmers of Minnesota. And by the time they started getting to this end of the country, all the farmland was taken up, and they would work their way over to the western part of Montana. And when they got here, oftentimes what they did was lumber work. They worked for the railroads, the mills. They were sawyers out in the woods. And so I picked to be close to Dina and Louis Sarheim. They were family friends. He worked for the railroad, was a conductor, many years, retired. They did what a lot of people did. They had a place up at Flathead Lake on Big Arm Bay with a bunch of other Norwegians cheek to jowl along the shoreline, and they enjoyed having that. They went up there and would go fishing a lot. Dina, when she got here, worked as a housekeeper and a cook, and she cooked and kept house for the Keith family when they were on the north side of the river. And when they moved to the south side of the river, she actually moved with them and was the cook in the big house. And the big house is the big maroon brick, half a city block fraternity house, Sigma Nu. So she was the cook there. And years ago, when we did a remodeling job in the house, we tore that master bathroom out. It had a big porcelain tub, and the only way we could get it out was to beat it out. She was shocked that we took the tub out of that house, because that was such a big, fine house to be in. Some of the other Norwegians that came then were, I have a great uncle who was instrumental in early Missoula, and he was a masonry contractor. And some of the buildings that he worked on that he was the contractor for are the Wilma Building, the Milwaukee Depot Boone and Crockett Club building, the Sentinel High School, or Hellgate High School, some part of the original building, so that they did more than just work in the woods and work on the railroad. They went ahead and they got other jobs doing other things. Another friend that came, that we knew, came to town, and he was born in Bergen, Norway, and his came over with his parents as a young child, started school up and spoke Norwegian, had to learn English and then be able to speak English, go through school. But education was important, so S.J. Knutson went on to get his eventually a master's degree in education, and was an administrator in the Missoula public school system for many years before he retired. There again, loved to be on the water. He had a cabin on the north side of Big Arm Bay, just across from the bay from Dina and Louis. There are other Norwegians. Sometimes they got here after there was the Dust Bowl era. It was dry. Dryland farming in North Dakota was not as good as it could be, so they would come to Missoula, and where there was a little chance of making a living. So Martin Solheim ended up starting in Dakotas and eventually ended up here in Missoula. So we have several of those. Another one that was an old-time Missoula Norwegian was Oscar Marshall Moy, and his family lived up just below Marshall Canyon ski area, and he often talked about when he'd walk down the hill from basically the Marshall Mountain, just below where the lodge is up there, walk down and catch the electric trolley to go to school. So he caught the trolley that went between Missoula and Bonner, and used to ride that to get into school. There are a bunch of others that were the Langs, and Stoverud Jewelers was his family came over, and then the second generation became he was a jeweler. His brother not getting the name right now. but his brother was a janitor in the school system and worked in the school system. So but oftentimes they would try to do other things.
Sounds like they came not all at once, but
yeah, the ones that came to Western Montana came in the later, usually the turn of the century era. So oftentimes they'd be the ones that ended up here in the early 1900s, and so a lot of the Missoula settlers came later. They were, they maintained their heritage in Norway. The group that was coming at that time were basically Lutherans, and so they founded a church, the St. Paul Lutheran Church, and they did that in the early 1900s. And then by the late 1920s, they decided that they were going to build a building, so they built St. Paul Lutheran Church over by Hellgate High School. If you notice on the tombstone, though, the original records of St. Paul Lutheran Church are all in Norwegian, and when they built the church, it's St. Paul English Lutheran Church on the cornerstone. And the reason they did that is because they wanted to assimilate, and they wanted to say that we have our services in English. So by that time, contrasting that with in 1960 when I started college back in Minneapolis, or 66, one of the kids on the dorm was from northern Minnesota. He spoke English with a heavier Norwegian accent than my parents did, who came from Norway. And in fact, it was only just a few years before that their church had changed from Norwegian services to English services. And the difference being is that when they got to the Midwest, they tended to clump up in groups and stayed together. District-wise, they were all from the same valley or the same community, and they would come to the same spot and set up their farms in the same spot. Whereas by the time they got here, the population was already established, and so they blended in. They tried to assimilate very rapidly into this. So that's why they went to the English Lutheran Church. So it's not because they're from England. The other thing they did is they started the Sons of Norway, and they wanted to maintain some of the connections they had with Norway. So the Sons of Norway in Missoula the first one was founded in 1941, and then they met at various places. I remember going to meetings above in the Union Hall, and some of the meeting rooms in the Union Hall, and then for a number of years they met in the Oddfellows Hall, and then finally they were able to obtain the Pines building after it had been in a fire. They got it for the salvage value, and were able to restore the building and build the lodge building that they have out there. So it was very important that they maintain the connections, but they didn't really necessarily want to speak just Norwegian. So my wife's mother, her parents came from Norway, and born in eastern Montana, in Glendive, and there it was so important that she never learned Norwegian, whereas by the time I got here, it was okay for an immigrant family to still speak the mother tongue. So I can speak Norwegian a little bit, so just some differences.
But they still maintain
Yeah, and we think about Norway as being a homogeneous Norwegian Lutheran community, and yet there were first immigrants that came over in big organized fashion were the sloopers in the early 1800s. And they were actually a religious group that was trying to escape what they perceived as some religious persecution and establish be able to practice the religion and not the state-run Lutheran religion. So even Norway had a little bit of dissension. A lot of those people ended up in some communities down in the Texas, Oklahoma area. So there's a Norwegian community down there of people that were dissenting from the strict Norwegian Lutheran tradition. So
They separated themselves.
yeah, and you know, they sort of thought that they could get land and set up a big, you know, set up a community based on their principles and tenets. And then, but by the time they started settling western Montana, they were pretty much blended in. There's the family that lived over by the alternative high school, Eglunds, the Sundas, the Langs. There's a whole community out in Bonner, Milltown area that was there. So
Oh, thank you.
yeah.